Well, that's a very familiar jingle melody for anyone who grew up during the 60s in this area. And rock and roll radio of the 1960s is the focus of a new book by our returning guest, LinDee Rochelle. Her new book is called Blast from Your Past, Book 2, Rock and Roll Radio DJs, The Swinging Sixties, 1960 to 1969. And this is a sequel to your previous book, which covered the early days of rock and roll radio.
It did, and it was actually the beginning of the popular rock and roll from 1954 to 59, so it's like the birth of rock and roll on the radio.
And I know that we talked about some of those early rock and roll DJs when you were last on with us, and while some of those DJs continued into the 1960s, 70s, and beyond, there was also a group of them that just could not adapt to the changes in music that began in the mid-60s, and they kind of felt left out in the cold.
I don't know that any of them admitted to being left out in the cold, but there's some who just went on to other things.
Right.
Because the music from 1960 was like bubblegum pop, and by 1969, we were in pre-heavy metal. It was like a whole new set of DJs that started from 65 on.
Who are some of your favorite DJs that you covered this time around in the new book?
Oh, gosh. That's like trying to pick a favorite child.
Well, there's Dr. Don Rose. I know he's no longer with us, but yeah, he was one of your favorites.
Right, but I did talk to his son, and that was fun. Unfortunately, his son didn't really know him until the 70s. But, yeah, Dr. Don was always one of my favorites because I grew up in the Northern California, San Francisco, East Bay area. As far as my favorite DJ, and everybody else can get upset if they want, but Bill Gardner is one that not a lot of people know by name. They probably did at the time, but he's the one that's been most helpful for me with, keeping me in contact with some of the DJs over the years when I kind of lost track of things. And he's the one that I gravitated toward in Phoenix in the 90s when we were both in that area, which is when I got to know him.
Right.
And so I have him starting in the mid-60s and Shotgun Tom Kelly out here on the San Diego area. Yeah, he starts in the mid-60s. So, I have some favorites, you might say, because their stories are maybe more fun or I have a more personal contact.
Well, that's one of the reasons why your books are so much fun, because you're turning the spotlight on all of these local radio guys. And look, most people think that the guy they grew up with in their area is world famous. Everyone all over the country knows who he is, and that is not the case. Now, you mentioned some of these names like Shotgun Tom Kelly. I know who that is. I know Pat O'Day in Seattle. I know all those guys. But the average person is just going to know the guy who was on in their area.
Right. The people here in San Diego have no idea who Cousin Brucey is.
Yeah, because
absolutely not. Or Joey Reynolds.
Right. Yeah. The era of the local celebrity, either a celebrity DJ or a guy on local TV. I mean, that's kind of over.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Your book has some great reproductions of surveys and advertising for various radio stations. And of course, you've got all these great stories from all of these great local DJs. And people always want to find out where they can hear air checks like the one we just played.
You can get air checks now, and there's a couple of online sites that you can listen to them without having to buy things. There's one guy that, realradio.com. Have you ever been there?
Mm-hmm, sure.
Yeah, and they've been wonderful. Of course, he's gone through some stuff trying to stay online and being able to continue doing the air checks because he had some issues with that, I guess, for a couple of years there. But now I guess it's back to pretty much business as usual, and he's a nonprofit, so he asks for a small assistance with it, but it's worth it. I mean, if you want to go up and just sit and listen to some of the DJs and how it was back then. I mean, and remember or learn for the first time what it was as compared to today's industry,
Well, I always say to, especially to young people, because they'll never quite understand, but in the 50s and certainly in the 60s and going into the 70s, a radio, your little portable radio that you would carry around with you, was that era's version of the iPhone.
Yes.
Because all the information you were going to need, for your weather, the news, what was happening in music, who was in town, everything was on that little transistor radio. Absolutely.
That's why the 60s cover has a transistor radio on the front.
Right.
I had to do it.
Well, folks, the family does.
That was Tom Donahue on the FM side of things, and AM and FM are both covered in the new book, Blast from Your Past, Book 2, Rock and Roll Radio DJs, The Swinging Sixties, 1960 to 1969, by our guest today, LinDee Rochelle. And in addition to the radio DJs you interviewed for both of your books, you also talked to some musicians, and they imparted to you how important radio was, and God forbid you tick off a program director or upset a DJ.
Yeah, I talked to a couple of the bands that I had. Let's see, I had the Five Americans that started in the 50s. Mm-hmm. They had a problem because one station in Texas had broken one of their records, and then they expected to be the one to break the next record. Well, the Five Americans, they felt that they should spread the wealth around a little bit,
Right.
And so they went to the competition and gave them the second record that they came out with, and all hell broke loose. Their manager actually sued the first radio station and won because that radio station had boycotted them. Mike Raybone of the Five Americans, he was shocked that his manager would do that. Their manager would do that. Their record producer, I'm sorry,
right?
That the record producer would literally sue the station, but he did. And they could prove through these humongous old-fashioned computers that we would laugh at now in California that taking a certain sample of the markets and this, that, and whatever, that second one would have been a bigger hit had they been able to have the airplay of that first station.
And here's that would have been bigger hit, Evil, Not Love by the Five Americans. Radio does not have that same level of importance today. Now, with streaming and podcasting and everything else, radio is still kicking. I mean, school closings are always going to be heard on the radio. It's always going to be the go-to place, I imagine. But
and breaking news, maybe.
Right, breaking news. But for the most part, it doesn't have that place of prominence in people's lives. I have trouble getting friends of mine to listen because they're just not accustomed to listening to the radio.
No,
despite the fact that I'm on the, you'd think they were my friend, they would do it, but they don't. They say, I want to hear the songs I want to hear when I want to hear them. So we live in kind of an on-demand world now where no one has the experience of waiting for your favorite song to come on.
No, I know.
And
they can just put it on anytime they want.
Right. They can just go over to YouTube and there it is.
Yeah.
But that was a big part of listening to the radio. Now, I'm speaking about the 70s here because that's really what I was doing. I was listening to radio in the 70s.
But it was true in the 60s, too.
Sure. And it was, for me, it was a big part of the fun, actually, especially if you got accustomed to a radio station's playlist and their rotation. And you would know that your favorite song is going to come up soon because it's been 2 hours and they haven't played it.
Right.
And you knew it was going to come up, and the anticipation and the frustration and the complaining. You would complain to your friends and say, I can't believe they played this garbage last night and I was waiting for my song. All of that was a cultural bonding experience.
It was an absolute bonding experience as listeners, and that's why another reason why the local DJ was so important. I mean, they arrived to events sometimes in limousines because they were also a celebrity. And it was so important to be able to know who your DJ was. And there were sometimes when I used to call up and just chat with them when they didn't have anything else to do late at night, you know?
Right. Oh, believe me, I know. I know people are calling all the time to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, you just chat about the music and, you know, what's going on and do you really like this station? And no, I don't. You know.
Right.
But no, it was a whole different era, and it was one that really bound us together in music and in society. You're so right about that.
So, if someone were interested in getting this book, the all-important question is, LinDee, where would they go in order to get it?
Well, as I read earlier today, what one author called the 800-pound gorilla, Amazon.
There you go.
Amazon, yes. And I have to say, you know, this is the first book that I have completely published on my own.
Wow.
And it was a very interesting experience.
Sure, I would imagine if you'd never done it before, yeah.
No, yeah. Well, I worked for a publisher when I published the first book. That was easy.
Right.
You know. So when I worked for the publisher, they took care of all the heavy lifting. This time around, I decided that I wanted to do it myself, and I did. And, you know, I'm pretty doggone proud of it.
There you go. Good for you.
Yeah, you're going to find it on Amazon. I am working on getting it into the libraries, but I haven't quite. It's only been a couple of weeks since I've had the paperback published. So still working on that aspect of things. But, yeah, you can get it on Amazon in both ebook and paperback. And if you want to go direct to the publisher, you can go to createspace.com.
I think everybody who listens to this program or is interested in radio of the past or radio the way it used to be and some would argue should be and could be if the restrictions were loosened. Boy, I bet you if they picked up the book and started reading, even if you didn't recognize the particular DJ, you would recognize your local hero in that DJ.
I think so, too. And one of the comments that I got from a reader was that, you know, he didn't know any of the DJs in the book, not a one, which he was a little disappointed in.
Right.
But, you know, there are thousands and thousands of DJs. So obviously the 40 or so that I interviewed is just a drop in the bucket. But he said he thoroughly enjoyed the book just because it brought that era back. And then he actually, you know, he remembered about the DJs that he did used to listen to. So it's just it's a nice walk down memory lane, or, you know, for grandparents and stuff to show to their grandkids, this is what we used to do. You know, this is how life used to be.
Amazon.com is really the best place, and then we also mentioned CreateSpace. And to follow you online, they could do that over on Facebook. They can.
They can go to Facebook at LinDee Rochelle, or they can go to Twitter at BlastFromPastBK. There's all kinds of places you can find me, you know. Quick search on Google or Yahoo, and, oh, gosh, I'm just in way too many places.
Right. All right. Well, thanks so much, LinDee. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.